ACTF and ACMI would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways of Greater Melbourne, the people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise that ACTF and ACMI are located on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. We also acknowledge First Nations people as the original storytellers of this land and recognise their significant contribution to the contemporary moving image. Teachers, please share your students' responses and questions in the Zoom chat throughout the workshop. Let's start by sharing the name of the traditional owners of the lands from which you're joining us today.
I'm a witch.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this very special Book Week event about character development with Australian author Nadia Wheatley. I'm Janine from the Australian Children's Television Foundation.
Hi everyone, I'm Alan and I'm from ACMI, the Museum of Screen Culture. Janine and I are so happy to be your hosts today. Usually we focus on films and television shows, but in our work. But today, sometimes we like to take stories that have been adapted, so books that have been adapted and made into screen stories. And that's what we're going to be doing today.
That's exactly right, Alan. One of those books that's been adapted is the My Place picture book, which I'm sure you are all familiar with. This book was written by Nadia Wheatley and illustrated by Donna Rawlins, and it was first published in 1987.
That's my original 1987 copy there, Janine.
Old fan there, original fan, Alan. We're very lucky to have Nadia joining us today for our Book Week celebration, and I'm so excited to learn more about storytelling and characters from her today. Nadia, good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Janine, Ellen, and children and teachers in your various Aboriginal lands across the nation. I'm coming to you today from the inner part of Sydney. So I'm in the land of the Eora Nation, and in my place, we're recognising all the nations across Australia. You might know that picture at the end of the book of the big tree with Barangaroo sitting in it, and her grandmother says, "We've always belonged to this place." But how long, Barangaroo asks, and how far, and Barangaroo's grandmother says forever and ever. And so with this picture and with these words, we're acknowledging the really deep time that Aboriginal people have been part of this land, and this country has been part of its First Nations people. So happy Children's Book Week, and let's get on with the celebration.
So Nadia, My Place is a picture book, so the story is told through words and pictures. Here is a picture of the timeline at the start of the My Place. It lists all the characters in the book and some of the events in Australia's history. Just in case some of the audience members are new to My Place, can you tell us about the structure and the themes of the story?
Okay, so a structure means the shape of a story. And most books start in the past, particularly history books, and they come up to now. But My Place is a little bit different because it starts now and then it goes backwards through what we call the long time of Australian history, through the couple of hundred years that people have come from nations across the earth, and then into the deep time of First Nations history, which is the longest history that any nation in the world has. So I'm nearly weeping as I say that, because we should all be proud of that history. In that timeline, you can see some circles, maybe a bit like the circles in the wonderful Aboriginal painting behind me. So this was done by an Aboriginal woman when I worked in the community of Papunya in the Northern Territory. That expresses the sense of time, that we're not worrying about years. We're just going into the very long time. But in the timeline of My Place, we're going backwards in 10-year slots. We call those 10-year slots decades. And so we're following a group of families and people and members of a community backwards in those 10-year slots.
So today we'll focus on one character from My Place. I'd love to learn more about Sophia, the character from 1968, and also her family. And I feel like, Janine, maybe you're taking Sophia vibes today.
I am. I've dressed as Sophia from the TV adaptation, so not so much from the book. Thank you for noticing. Yeah, it's my book week dress up.
We first meet Sophia in 1958 when Michaelis introduces his baby sister. And at that time, the family have recently arrived in Australia from a tiny Greek island. A decade later, Sophia is a 10-year-old girl and Michaelis has all grown up. Nadia, here are some of the words that you wrote from Sophia's perspective. We learn simple things about Sophia. We can say that her name is Sophia. She is 10 and her family is from Greece. But we can also learn a lot more about her family and the time period through the rest of the words. What did you want readers to learn about Sophia, and how did you communicate these ideas?
Great question, particularly the question about communication. So Sophia begins, my name's Sophia, this is my place. And as you read the book, you meet 20 different characters, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, and they all begin with a similar introduction. They say their name and they say, this is my place, until we get to Barangaroo at the end, and she says, I belong to this place. So the first thing I wanted to communicate was the sense of the character speaking directly to you, the reader. And then each character goes on and talks very simply about their home and their life. So Sophia, like everyone, tells us about her home, her family, her pet, and a very special party that was held at her home. But in the map that's part of every double-page spread, we learn too about her neighbours, her friends, and her community. It's a multicultural community. It's a community that's typical of Australia because it's got people who come from lands across the sea, from Vietnam, from China, from America, Germany, from all sorts of countries in Europe, as well as still having First Nations people living here. The book is engaged with the country or the land, and we see that land and fresh water in the map through the big tree that's at the top of every map and through the creek, the freshwater creek that is at the bottom of every map. So though it's just a tiny story spread across 2 pages, we're learning big things about Sophia and her family and about the capital C country where she lives.
Thank you, Nadia. That's so great to learn more about what readers can take from your words on that page. Aside from Sophia's family, I think her character helps us to learn about real historical events that were happening at the time. So how do we learn about these historical events through Sophia's story?
Well, Sophia is 10 years old in 1968. If you look at every single double page of My Place, it has the year in numbers written up in the top corner. So 1968 was a very, very exciting year in Australian history. I was a young woman at that time, and it was a politically challenging time. It was a year after the referendum to give Aboriginal people inclusion in quite a few things in this country. Sadly, that hasn't been completely fulfilled and wasn't fulfilled last year in a different referendum. But we had a referendum in 1967 where Australian people voted yes. It was also a time when Australia was realising it was part of Asia, But at the same time, we were at war in an Asian country. We were at war in Vietnam. And finally, one significant thing about 1968, it was a great time for music. And that's part of the story that Sophia tells you about, her particular interest in a particular band that was playing music at that time. That band, of course, was known as the Beatles, and we can see posters of 3 of the Beatles on her wall, and maybe you can work out which Beatle she has named her budgie after.
That's a really good point, Nadia. I know that you know, you haven't referred to the Beatles in your text, but the images, the pictures that Donna Rawlins has drawn really add to your story, and those illustrations help us to learn more about Sophia and her story.
Yes, well, making a picture book is a bit like making a film. It's what we call a collaborative form of working. And so it's people working together. If I'm writing a book that's just words, I can pretty much sit alone until the editing stage. But with a picture book, the writer is working with the illustrator, and with Donna and me, we divided up the material or the story and said, what can you tell in the pictures? What can I tell in the words? So I didn't have to mention the Beatles in the words because Donna could put their pictures on the wall. But other kinds of things we can learn if we put the wall in that picture about Sophia in that double page spread. If we look at the family, have a look at that building that's on the wall of what's probably the lounge room or the dining room and see if you can recognise what it is. If you don't know now, maybe after this finishes, you can have a talk with your teacher and work out what the building is and what it tells us about Sophia's family. If we look at the clothing, it's not quite the same as today, not terribly much different. But if we look at Sophia's mother, her mama, maybe mama's clothing is a little bit different, particularly the headdress is a bit different from what your mum might be wearing. I like to look at the T-shirt that Michaelis is wearing with L-O-V-E on the back. And you might wonder why he's got love on his back at a time when he might be going off to become a soldier in a war. We look at the house and it's blue, and Sophia actually tells us that the house has recently been painted blue because a lot of Greek Australians do this because blue is a significant colour for Greeks. And again, afterwards you could maybe look for the Greek flag and see why Greeks might paint their houses blue. Okay.
Oh, it's so interesting to learn about how you work together on the book and all the small details that fill just those 2 pages to help tell the story. I wonder if the students and the teachers joining us today have noticed these details before. Teachers and students, let's take a moment to share something that you've learnt about Sophia through the words and pictures in My Place. I want you to turn in your classrooms, turn to the person next to you and talk to a partner to share your ideas. We're going to give you about 30 seconds, somewhere around that. Now teachers, I want you to be on ears open, and if you're hearing some great ideas from the classroom, please share them with us in the chat. Okay, we're getting some great responses have been shared. So let me read some of them out to you. So their Greek heritage, oh, they're all coming in thick and fast now. Let me bump back down. Their Greek heritage is important to them, that the extended family all live together. She likes the Beatles and she has a very big place. Let me see.
I think here's another great one from Macaulay Rose Bay that said, that Sophia's connected with her culture, that she likes animals, and that she has good taste in music. So maybe there's another Beatles fan joining us today. Oxley College has also said that she really likes the Beatles and that Sophia's brother has to go to a war. And we have here as well from Andrew saying that Sophia's extended family like to come together and share food.
Yep. Oh, yep. She likes to visit graves is another one, and she likes nature. What else? Oh, and she has a koala toy. That's a really nice little detail, isn't it, right there in the picture?
Fantastic. I feel like students have been really examining this text. They've found so much, especially with that insight from Nadia about how her and Donna work together.
Yeah. So well done, everyone. Thanks for sharing your ideas.
Now let's learn more about character development on the screen. So in film or television shows, facial expressions, gestures, movement, dialogue, costumes, music, and other elements can all help to build a character in those modes. So when adapting a character for the screen, filmmakers have to make decisions about which aspect of the book to keep, which to leave out, which to add on to. Now here are some images of the on-screen characters Sophia and Michaelis from the My Place television series. Nadia, could you tell us more about the TV series adaptation? What was your role in the process?
Every story has three elements. One is the place of the story, where it happens. Another one is the people in the story, that we call characters. And the third bit is the plot of the story, the things that happen in the story. Now, My Place is a little bit unusual, the book, because on every double-page spread, we get the place very strongly in the map. We get, and in the other pictures, we get the characters, the main character and her family and her friends and her community. But we don't get very much of the plot. Like in Sophia's story, we find out about Michaelis going off to war. We find out a little bit about Sophia playing in the graveyard. That was a good thing for one of the schools to pick up from the map. But we don't get a lot of story. And this was open for the filmmakers to take the bit that I'd left out and to make up their own stories. So the producer, the director, and the script writers developed the story. I wasn't the boss of the story, but I was called the history consultant to tell them if they were getting their history right or wrong. And I was the story consultant. So they would show me the written scripts and I could make comments, but I didn't have the right to boss them around and tell them what to do, because we come back to that word collaborative. It's a collaborative medium and we work together, and there's got to be room for other people to put their roles into the story.
Okay, so let's watch a clip that introduces Sophia in the TV series. And please let us know in the chat if you learn anything new about this character by watching her on screen.
What a great clip. Thank you everybody for sharing your observations in the chat. Somebody has said that we learn the proper Greek pronunciation for Michaelis. I'm trying my best with my pronunciation there. And we also learn that Sophia is so protective of her brother. Someone else has commented that Sophia doesn't want anyone to steal her brother away. And Jeddah has also learnt that they're in a time of war, and that I think Sophia might enjoy gossiping. Well, I thought Sophia's appearance on screen was quite similar to the book. She had her pigtails and her clothes looked a little bit older. I also noticed that, like another school did, that we know that Sophia can speak Greek because she understands her family when they're speaking at the kitchen table in Greek. But to me, in the TV show, her personality seemed a little bit different. I thought that Sophia seemed a little bit cheeky in that clip that we saw.
I think I'd agree with that.
Yes, because she got her brother into trouble at home and then she seemed quite happy about getting him into trouble, didn't she? So I suppose that that TV adaptation made me think a little bit differently about the character. And Michaelis' girlfriend is mentioned in the book, in Nadia's text, but she's not a big part of the story. And in the TV episode, we also see that Michaelis's family was unhappy about him kissing his girlfriend in the street. So let's remember, this was a different period. This was in the 1960s, and different families have different rules. So that was inappropriate for Michaelis's family, but it might not be inappropriate for a family now. And one last thing.
We see the graves. Did anyone pick up that where Michaelis and Janice are walking through is the graveyard that we hear about in the map and that someone mentioned in the last chat? So every tiny little detail is part of it.
I did not notice that. I'm going to have to re-watch that clip, I think, Nadia. Thank you. I wonder if any students picked that up. And one last thing I noticed, that the time that the story is set has also changed, because in the book, Michaelis has already gone away, but in the TV series, we're waiting for him to go away. He hasn't left yet.
Yeah, I noticed that too, yeah.
So we know lots about the changes that were made to the story, Nadia, but when your book was adapted to the screen, what were some of the most important things that you wanted to keep for the story?
Yes, so I had a really lot of long talks with Penny Catman, the producer of the TV series, before they started writing even, and we talked about authenticity, keeping the essential essence of truth to things. And Penny was fantastic about this. So that for the First Nations stories, she employed First Nations script writers and directors and, of course, actors. And for the stories about Greek Australian families, she was sure to get the culture right by having Greek Australian advisors and, of course, actors who could speak Greek and who knew about Greek things from the inside. It was so authentic, it was so true, that when I went along to the set, not for 1968, but for 1958, for that scene you saw a little bit before from the book, when it is Sophia's christening party, when Sophia's a little baby, they had set up for the TV filming a backyard, like a Greek backyard, and they're having a wonderful Greek barbecue in it. And when I walked into it, it was so Greek that I was transported back to Greece, where I'd lived for 3 years when I was a young woman, and I found myself spontaneously speaking Greek to all the old ladies who were at the party. So it, to me, was proof that it really was a little bit of Greek Australia set in inner Sydney.
So Sophia tries to break up Michaelis and his girlfriend Janice many times in the episode, but there is one particular sequence that I really love. So we're going to watch this clip and we're going to focus on how the filmmakers created a funny exchange between characters. Let's watch.
She is cheeky, isn't she?
Very, very.
That was quite cheeky.
So this clip shows us how timing and framing help to create a particular mood. We see Sophia as a funny girl who's a little bit cheeky, and the voiceover and the close-up camera shots help us to see how the characters feel, and then the subtitles help us to understand what's happening in the story. So let's check the script for this episode. When we look at a script, the layout of the words are different from a book. The words are centered on the page. Here we can see the character's name in capital letters. Under this we have the action in brackets. Then we can see the character's dialogue, what the character is saying. In the action text here, you can see the other clues about techniques the filmmakers used to develop Sophia's character. The script guides the actors' expressions and gestures as well as their dialogue. Words like shocked and furious expression help to build the comedy in this scene.
It was so interesting to pull apart that script and see, the guidance for actors is one of those techniques that filmmakers have used, as well as, like you mentioned earlier, the framing, the script, the camera shots. So great. Now, we mentioned earlier that characters help the audience to learn about events in Australia's history. So in Sophia's story, Michaelis becomes a soldier in Vietnam. Let's watch another clip to see how this issue is explored on screen. That's a really interesting clip. So we learnt that Michaelis didn't actually want to be a soldier, but he didn't have a choice about it. So there were some different rules in Australia in the 1960s, and conscription was one of these. So teachers, that's something we'll send you an extra resource for after this session, if you'd like to explore further with your students. Nadia, we've learnt so much from our chat today, and Ellen and I have really enjoyed interviewing you. So now I think we should let the students have a turn, because students and teachers always love to ask you questions. So teachers, you can start your typing, and while you're putting in your students' questions, Nadia, there's one last question I had that I've been thinking about during the session. What ended up happening to Sophia and Michaelis? Did Michaelis return home safely?
Yes, after a couple of years, Michaelis came home safely from Vietnam and he married Janice. And then after another couple of years, they had a son called Mike. So Mike's a sort of a short form of Michaelis, isn't it? And here you see Mike, who's I think 7 years old in this picture. He's got a different pet. He hasn't got a budgie like Sophia. He's got a pussycat. But we do see Sophia in this picture. You can see Helen's put a big circle around her. And so it's an Easter party, a special Greek Easter party where you get red egg, not chocolate eggs. And I think Sophia's bringing the salad out for the lunch. So we can see this extended family. I was so pleased that someone in the other chat used that word, this Greek family that has many layers, where as new people come into the family like Janice, they're embraced by the family and become part of this great big family and part of the community. So we do have a very happy ending for Michaelis and for Sophia.
Fantastic. I'm so happy to hear that, and I know that our audience will be too. So the questions are coming in thick and fast, Nadia. I have one question very early on from Susan, who was keen to know, Susan noticed that you give a pet to each of the characters in your book, and was there, what was the thinking behind which pet you gave each character? Was there anything that made you figure that out?
Yes, every little detail in My Place. It looks such a simple book, and many people have said to me, oh, I could have written that book. And I say, yes, maybe, but you didn't. Every single detail had to be thought out and, in fact, worked out on a big chart, so that I didn't have things doubling up. And so the choice of the pet had to suit the personality or character of the character, but it also had to be keeping with the place. So people couldn't really have a camel or an elephant or a lion or a tiger or even a kangaroo, except I suppose maybe Barangaroo might have had a little wallaby for a pet, but she doesn't, she has a dog. But it also had to fit with the time, so that, for example, Colum, who's our character in 1938, which was a time that was very, very economically difficult, and Colum's family was very poor, his pet is a chicken, a hen, so that their family can get eggs. And in another time, I think it's Michaelis himself, I've got his check, yes, Michaelis has silkworms. So again, the family had recently come from Greece. They weren't going to have a dog or a cat or another sort of pet, but he wanted a pet, and so he got silkworms. And similarly, Sophia has a budgie that was quite in keeping with her family and her time and her place. So it all had to be worked out very, very carefully. I remember that in the 1918 episode, the little boy has a goat to get milk. So sometimes the pets are quite useful.
All right, I'm looking at the questions. We have, is it Elisa?
Yep.
So are the characters based on real people or people you knew? And then there's kind of a second part, because all these questions are coming in, so we're kind of blending the questions together to get a lot in. So who maybe do you base character Janice from, and was it from your life experience? Sorry.
Okay, so probably like all writers, the person who imbues most of my main characters is myself, whether the character's a boy or a girl or an old man or an old woman or a kid. They come out of myself. But I did a lot of historical research for my place, actually for a specific area. And so for the communities of people, the Greek Australians, the German Australians, I followed the types of people who were really living in that area. And just for Janice, because I was a young woman in 1968, it was actually very easy to put in that character. It was harder to put in some of the characters from different times and from very different cultural backgrounds. And of course, we have to be very respectful and very careful when we're writing First Nations characters. And so I had First Nations friends who were consultants, and as I mentioned, there were First Nations consultants for the TV series.
Thank you, Nadia. That's great to learn how you applied your own experience in writing the book and then got advice from other experts with lived experience to fill in the gaps for you. Now, one question that we've been asked lots of times.
I think it says everyone
has asked this question. What inspired you to write the book My Place, Nadia?
Place. So all my books come out of place, or capital C, country, and I get my ideas for all my books by walking around. I don't set out to look for a story or look for a book. I just live my life going for walks. In fact, I'm going to go for a walk straight after this Zoom is finished. And where I'm going to go is up to the big tree, because it's in my area, very close to where I live. And so after many years of just visiting the big tree for fun and thinking about it and thinking about how kids might have played in it, one night when there wasn't anything on TV and I didn't have anything to do, but I had a pencil and an exercise book, I started to draw a little map, and I found myself writing the words, "My name's Laura, it is my place." And so those, of course, are the very first words of the book. They're not Sophia's word, but they're like Sophia's words. And it was that that inspired my writing of the book. So it was the big tree, it was the area where I live, it was the sense that this area, like all of Australia, is a First Nations country. And that is what I wanted to bring into the book, as well as the sense of the people from many countries who come here.
Thank you, Nadia. That's something interesting for students and teachers to take away, isn't it? How you can be inspired by your own place. So the big tree is right near where Nadia lives, and there might be...
And you've got a picture of it behind you at
we
this
have.
minute.
We're pretending we are at the tree as well. And you might have something natural in your local environment or something man-made that could inspire some stories in your own class. Now, another really interesting question we've had come through, Nadia. Why did you choose to tell your story in first person from each character's point of view?
So a writer makes many decisions as they are writing a book, and you don't sometimes get all the answers in the first few minutes. I did get that I voice when I was doing my little map, and I got the I voice for the book very, very quickly, but I don't always. There's no right way or better way for telling a story, but there's a way that's going to make it most comfortable for the shape of the story. So I was telling this in a picture book, which is a pretty short form, and I wanted to get quickly into the skin or into the eyes or into the mind of every character. And so the quickest way in is to tell it through an I voice, tell it through the first person. Sometimes if I've got more pages, I will write it through what we call the third person. So I'm calling the character he or she or they. But the I voice is a very quick one to get into.
Okay, so Melissa would like to know, how did you feel when you first released My Place?
Oh, amazingly excited. It was a very, very, very hot day in November 1987. We were having a book launch here in Sydney, we being Donna and me, in the actual landscape of My Place. And a lot of children from a lot of schools were coming. And Donna and I spent the day before making fairy bread and chocolate crackles to take to the launch. We had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of chocolate crackles, and we took them to the book launch, and the book was launched by a young Aboriginal girl from Tranby Aboriginal College. And of course, in the really hot weather, all of our chocolate crackles melted, but nobody seemed to mind. We all ended up in rather a mess, eating messy chocolate crackles and eating fairy bread that had gone a bit crispy on the corners.
That's so funny. What a day to remember.
Oh,
It's making me hungry now, actually. I could eat that. Nadia, there's a question here that I'm interested in the answer about as well. Andrew wants to know, do you have plans to tell us more My Place stories up to the current day? Have you got it in you to write a sequel, Nadia?
No, look, I think we came to an end with the TV series, and if you're clever, you'll have worked out the TV series actually tells a longer story than the book story. So Laura's story in the book is in 1988, and for the TV series, it got shifted ahead to 2008, and then we slotted in Mohammed, and the Vietnamese girls had 2 decades, and then we went into it, and then we put more deep time, more First Nations history at the end. But you can't just keep sort of mechanically sticking more pages into a book. It's a bit tricky. So no, there won't be any more My Place stories, but I do have other books that people can read, and I've done more explorations of that same area, that same country, notably in a book called Going Bush, where my partner Ken and I took 16 children on a bushwalk through some of the same area. So you can make your own My Place stories, of course, and children around the world have done this and sent them to me by doing a map of your own country, your own area, and writing into it the kinds of things you know and to do.
all right. I'm really sorry, audience, but we are nearly out of time for any more questions. Thank you, Nadia, for such interesting conversation. We've learnt so much about how characters are developed in books and television. Schools in the audience, you could practice these skills by comparing and contrasting one of the other characters in My Place. Nadia, do you have any final words for our audience today?
Okay, I've talked twice about these 3 things: plot, people, and place. And what I find is that when people, like students, are starting to write, they get so excited about the plot, they jump straight in without thinking too much about their characters or thinking about the place of the story. So I always said the best thing to do is get out your coloured pencils, get a nice big bit of paper, and just let your mind go kind of free and start doing a map of where you would like the story to happen. It's not a picture to illustrate the book. It's just a map where you're making up ideas, and in that I voice, in that first person voice, start writing into the map all sorts of things the character might be interested in, like this is where I play with my friends, this is where I go to school, this is where I visit grandma. And through that, you will find that the character and the place develop themselves, and then it's really easy to work out the plot, because when you've got people interacting with place, you get the story. So that's my tip for moving forward.
Thank you so much, Nadia. That's a great little gem of advice for students to take away in Book Week if they would like to start developing their own stories after being inspired by your talk today. Teachers, we would love to know what you and your students enjoyed about today's session. So we're sharing a feedback form in the chat. This feedback helps us to continue these free sessions for your classroom. So please take a moment to fill them out for us. And if you're wanting to catch up on My Place TV episodes, you can find series 1 and 2 on ABC iView. And I'm sure you have many copies of Nadia and Donna's book in your school library or in your classroom library. Thank you, Nadia, again, and thank you everybody else for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of Book Week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.